All right, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us today for our Envision My Ride Bus Priority Study virtual community meeting. Today's community meeting will consist of a presentation followed by a Q&A. So to kick us off, I'd like to introduce our project manager, Mr. Bruce Jones.
Thank you, Julianne. Good afternoon, everyone. So as Julianne mentioned, my name is Bruce Jones, and I am the project manager over the Envision My Ride Bus Priority Study. And so today we want to give you all an update as far as where we are with some of the recommendations, and also provide you with information on how you can provide input as we continue through this round of engagement. So before we get started, I do want to go over a few housekeeping things. So if you are on your Gmail or YouTube account and you would like to leave a question, feel free to drop that in the chat. So once I conclude the presentation, we'll have a live Q&A where I'll answer your questions that you submit. Do want to note too that this meeting is being recorded. So if you're unable to stay for the full duration of the meeting, or if you want to come back to it at a later time, we'll have this link available on our CATS YouTube page, and then also on our ridetransit.com/envisionmyride, or .org, I'm sorry, ridetransit.org/envisionmyride page as well. And we'll have that link available at the end of the presentation too, so you can copy that if you'd like. So just to start, just want to give you an overview of the agenda. So we'll start by giving you a high-level overview of what we're doing with Envision My Ride and the Bus Priority Study. Then we'll go into some of the system-wide improvements that we're making in terms of bus stop improvements and signal priority throughout the network. Then we'll go into the focus corridors that we've identified for additional priority treatments. So we'll first explain types of bus delay, and then also interventions to improve them. And then we'll also go into how we select corridors for improvements. And then we'll go into next steps and how you can get involved and provide input as well. So to start things off, a lot of you may be familiar with Envision My Ride and the Bus Priority Study. And so these two initiatives are working to help CATS build what we're calling a better bus network. And so this is taking from best practices from a number of peer agencies throughout the country as they begin some of their system redesigns and capital improvements to help improve service for passengers. So Envision My Ride established the initial foundation for planning. So we went out to the public back in 2018 to hear about what you value in terms of your bus network. And so from that, we learned that individuals wanted more frequent service. So improving the number of routes that operate every 15 minutes or better, creating more direct bus service where possible, and then also implementing more crosstown connections where possible as well. So shifting away from that hub and spoke model that fed a lot of our routes into uptown, and instead having more crosstown connections to hubs in outlying areas. In addition to that, we also heard that individuals wanted more connectivity between bus and also light rail for their transfers. And so as we continue to roll out improvements to our bus network through Envision My Ride, we're now focusing on how we can implement capital improvements through the Bus Priority Initiative. And so with this, we're looking at how we can roll out improvements known as priority treatments that'll help speed up your service. So making it more reliable, making sure that it comes on time so that you can get to your destination. And in addition to that, we're also looking at how we can improve connectivity, not only between bus and bus, but between other modes as well. And so as we begin to roll out mobility hubs and bus stop level improvements, we want to ensure that we're also providing connections to other forms of mobility as well, such as rideshare programs, bicycles, trails, and other connections. And so just to give you an overview of the timeline, so I mentioned we began some of the work initially in 2018 with the structural improvements. So with this, we added additional crosstown service beginning in March of 2018 when we opened our Blue Line extension in Northeast Charlotte. We continued some network improvements in October of 2018, where we modified additional service and extended some routes to new areas. In addition to that, we did begin some initial frequency improvements in 2020 as well. So we increased the number of routes that operate every 15 minutes or better. Currently, we have 5 bus routes that operate every 15 minutes or better, and that's in the post-COVID world as well. We also introduced our Metro Rapid BRT service that operates between the North Met communities and Uptown Charlotte. So providing a faster connection to and from those two destinations. And so as funding becomes available, we'll continue to roll out some of the improvements to frequency and then also network improvements through Envision My Ride. So the bus priority study picks up the capital side of things. And so now we're looking at how we can make investments to improve the passenger experience, both from a speed and reliability standpoint, but then also at the bus stop level. And so we began some of the initial work with the bus priority study earlier this year. We went out initially to the public in spring of this year, where we heard more about values as it relates to your bus service. And so with that feedback and input, we developed goals and objectives that we use to help us identify priority treatments that we can begin to roll out throughout the network, and then also on 6 focus corridors, we implement enhanced treatments as well. And I'll explain those here in detail in the next couple of slides as well. And then as we are getting ready for our next round of outreach, we're currently in the fall outreach. So as you can see on the screen in the timeline, we're at community meeting 2. And so now what we're doing is we're getting feedback from you all on some of the initial recommendations that we've developed for system-wide improvements, and then also on the focus corridors that we'll be looking at. And then as we continue to go into the study, we'll begin to refine based on public input, and then present additional recommendations back to the public and back to you all early next year. So I mentioned some of the system-wide improvements that we're making. So with the bus priority study, we're looking to improve bus stops system-wide. And so that also includes rolling out what we're calling mobility hubs. And essentially those work to provide enhanced amenities at our bus stops, but then also they work to help improve first mile, last mile connectivity for riders. So making sure that you have frequent access to some of our frequent routes within a specific zone. And I'll get to some examples here shortly of what those look like. In addition to that, what you see on the map here are the corridors that we've identified for 15-minute or better service. So routes like Central Avenue, routes like Wilkinson, routes like Betty Ford, South Tryon, those are all identified as future routes where we'll have high frequency service operating throughout the week. In addition to that, we'll have the ability to communicate with traffic signals as well, known as transit signal priority. So all of our current network roadways that are operated by CDOT, our partner agency in the city, that's the Charlotte Department of Transportation, we'll have the ability to communicate with the traffic signals. So if we face any delay at the intersection, our buses can communicate with the traffic signal to extend a green light or advance a green light so that we can clear the intersection. And so that's an improvement that we'll be rolling out system-wide. In addition to that, we also have identified focus corridors where we'll identify additional treatments that we could potentially roll out to help improve speed and reliability. And that'll be the focus of what we're looking at today in terms of this presentation, and also the open house that I'll mention later on in this presentation. So before we get there, I mentioned some of the bus stop improvements that we'll be looking at. And so this is one example of a mobility hub, and it's known as a mobility center. And so mobility hubs are important because they provide those vital connections for riders. So it's easy to transfer between different services. So picture what we have at our light rail stations, for instance. When you're connecting to and from light rail in the bus, we have, if you are familiar with the light rail lines, picture JW Clay, for instance, or University City Boulevard station, where we have the ability to have dedicated space for our buses to lay over, and then also easy transfer connections for individuals that need to access the rail line and then also the bus lines. So picture that service, but then mobility centers can also be lower level in terms of Rosa Parks Transit Center or Eastland Transit Center, where we have connectivity between different bus routes that interact there. We also have dedicated space if we need to lay over, if the bus needs to have an end of the line point there, we'll have dedicated space. But then we're also looking to improve mobility centers in regards to implementing additional amenities such as bicycle storage, off-board fare payment, and additional services to help speed up the boarding process, and then also make it easier for individuals to connect to and from the bus network and other forms of mobility. Similar to a mobility center, we also have the mobility plaza. And so how this operates is where you have 2 routes that intersect at a major intersection. We'll have 4 far side stops so that we can provide easy transfer connections on the street level for individuals. And so far side essentially means that we replace our bus shelters after the signal. And so that I mentioned signal priority is being rolled out on our network. And the way that this works is that we'll be able to get through the intersection or clear the intersection, if you will, and be able to serve the stop so that we can drop off passengers without being delayed at the intersection. And then also this features improved amenities such as crosswalk improvements so that individuals can safely navigate to and from the bus stops if they need to transfer. And then additional amenities too, such as real-time information signage, wayfinding signage, bicycle storage, and then also scooter storage as well to help improve that first mile, last mile connectivity that I mentioned earlier. So I spoke to the system-wide improvements, and now we'll go into the types of bus delay that we face and why it's important for us to implement priority treatments. So we have a number of potential delays that we face on our bus routes. So the biggest one is dwell delay. And so that means the amount of time that it takes for our buses to stop and pick up passengers. So the amount of time that it takes for the bus to stop at the bus stop, open the doors, pick up passengers, drop off passengers, and then continue to the next bus stop. So that's what's known as dwell delay. And there's a number of factors that can contribute to that. So of course, stopping at bus stops, the amount of time that it takes for individuals to board, the amount of time that it takes individuals to pay their fare is another key component to that. And then also if you're loading a bike, if you're traveling with that on the front of the bus, we typically have a bike rack for individuals to store that. And then also the amount of time it takes for you to find your seat. So there's a number of factors that contribute to dwell time delay. In addition to that, we also face signal delay. And so that's the amount of time that it takes for us to clear an intersection or get through a traffic light. So of course we have delay like any other vehicle in traffic. So we have issues facing that. And then also waiting in line at traffic in terms of at the intersection. So that's where signal priority comes into play to help us clear that so that we can get through intersections without facing increased delay times. There's also re-entry delay. So anytime our buses have to pull over to the curb, oftentimes we'll have to pull over to the curb to pick up and drop off passengers. A lot of the times we'll have to wait before we can safely merge back into traffic. And so that's also another factor that contributes to delay that we face on our bus routes. And so I went through some of the examples for the types of delay that we face. Now we're looking to some potential toolkits that we can utilize to improve bus service to make sure that we're offering faster commute times and more reliable service for our customers. And so there's things that I mentioned, such as signal priority. And so that's what you see in the graphic on the right. And so just to explain this, the bus is pulling up to the intersection. It communicates with the traffic signal. The traffic signal turns green and the bus will continue through the intersection to pick up the passengers at the far side or after the intersection where you see the number 4 on that logo. We also have it building upon transit signal priority, what's known as queue jumps here on the left. And how this works is the bus will pull up to a designated spot at the intersection. Once it reaches that point, it'll get a special signal that permits only the bus to continue. And so it essentially jumps ahead of stalled traffic. So all other traffic at the intersection would still have a red light. Pedestrians would not be able to cross as well. The only vehicles that would be able to clear the intersection will be the buses. And so that will allow us to get a head start so that we can clear some of the traffic congestion that we face there. In addition to that, looking at how we roll out our bus stops is another key component. So looking at how we can improve the bus boarding process by offering real-time information. So that includes signage, but then it also includes the new real-time app that we have and we recently rolled out. So this provides real-time arrival information on our buses so individuals can understand and know when their bus is running behind or if it's running on schedule, and so that they can appropriately adjust their schedule as needed. And then also offering enhanced amenities at the bus stop. So making sure that we have amenities in place that help speed up the bus boarding process. And then also looking at how we can provide a comfortable experience for passengers as they wait for the bus. In addition to that, looking at where we can consolidate potential stops. So if we have a stop on every block, of course, that means that the bus would have to stop more. So looking at strategic locations and where we can place bus stops so that we can travel along routes quickly, but then also building upon, as I mentioned before, offering additional amenities so that if individuals have to walk further to get to a bus stop, the trade-off is that they would have amenities such as seating with the shelter, and then also coverage to help protect them from the elements. In addition to that, yield to bus rules and extending the sidewalk as well so that we don't have to pull over to the curb and then face those delays that we face with re-entry to get back into the line of traffic to continue along the route. And so touching on that again, so this is an example of the curb extension. And so essentially it would extend the sidewalk out so that the bus can pull up and so that we can safely pick up and drop off passengers, especially if passengers are traveling by wheelchair. We want to make sure that we have an accessible boarding area. And so this extends the curb so that the bus is able to pull and make inline stops as they pick up passengers. In addition to that, other treatment types include bus-only lanes. And so this will be a dedicated lane for travel for buses where they would have exclusive use of the lane and they would be able to make those pickup points at the curb without facing the delay of merging back into oncoming traffic. Next, we have fare collection changes. So this is where we have off-board fare payment. A number of you might be familiar with this if we have or if you use our light rail stations, for instance. A lot of our light rail platforms have the ability to purchase fare before you board the train. So looking at how we can implement or integrate something similar to the bus stop level as well. And then also looking at how we can move towards a non-cash fare payment. So looking at maybe using smartphones or any other type of solution so that we can help speed up the boarding process as well. And so these are all toolkits that I mentioned for potential treatments. So now I'll go into, well, before that, I'm sorry. We have two other examples, including all-door boarding and then also level boarding. And so all-door boarding includes picking up passengers from both doors on the bus stop. And so we would have the ability for individuals to pay fare at the back of the bus as well. And so that helps speed up the boarding process. And then also level boarding. So similar to what we have at our light rail stations, where individuals are able to board the train without an ADA ramp being deployed, having level boarding at our bus stops so that we can help improve and speed up the boarding process for individuals traveling by wheelchairs, or if they have a stroller or another similar item that they're boarding the bus with. And so I went through some of the toolkit and potential treatment types. And so now I just want to walk through the focus corridors that we'll be looking at for implementing some of those additional treatment types that I mentioned before. So before we get there, first we went out to the public, as I mentioned back in the spring. We did initial outreach and conducted a survey to ask you what's important and what do you value as it relates to the bus network. And so we had a survey that we conducted where we had over 5,000 individuals provide input. And so that helped us develop goals and objectives that we use to identify some of the focus corridors. And so what we learned from the public outreach is that individuals wanted to have access to and from employment opportunities, and then also better bus service that's on time and more reliable. And then also better bus service to individuals who don't own a car or who rely on bus services as their primary means of transportation. So those are the most important values that individuals had in terms of investment priorities. In terms of most important bus stop amenities, we learned that individuals wanted real-time arrival information, and then also the opportunity to have seating at bus stops where possible to make the wait time more pleasant and comfortable for individuals. In addition to that, individuals told us that they wanted us to improve investments in service quality, and then making sure that we're offering service and providing service that's accessible to all individuals that need to access our services. And so what we did is we took those and we developed goals and objectives. And so we had 4 overall goals that we focused on to help us identify those corridors. So that's enhancing access to opportunities. And so that's looking at increasing access to grocery stores, healthcare facilities, pharmacies, employment types. And then also making sure that we enhance opportunity to individuals so that they have an easy accessible route to get to and from transit. And then also making sure that we're serving some of the future growth areas and then also activity centers that's being developed throughout Charlotte. We also learned that individuals want us to connect the bus priority network to other modes. So making sure that we improve the transfer opportunity between bus routes and between light rail as well. And then also other forms of mobility, such as bike trails and other connections too. We also learned that individuals wanted us to enhance existing frequency and then provide service that's on time so that we can prevent any delay where possible. In addition to that, individuals told us that it was important for us to provide equitable transit access for individuals. And so what we looked at for the focus corridors is how can we provide service that serves affordable housing locations? How can we provide service that serves areas where individuals are at a greater likelihood or face a greater likelihood of being displaced? And then also, how can we better serve areas that have lower access to personal vehicles? And so with that, we began to initially rank the routes that you see here on the map. So we started with 22 routes initially that we identified for future high frequency service. And so the goal of this is now identifying 6 corridors where we can implement additional priority treatments to help speed up service. And so what we looked at is, of course, to get through this list, the number of connections that we have to existing light rail, and then other transit modes as well, so bus and streetcar. And then also looking at the number of transfer opportunities between buses outside of Uptown, so looking at the number of routes on the corridor. Of course, we looked at ridership for consideration with this as well, but then also some of the goals that were established in the Charlotte 2040 plan. So mainly looking at how we can meet equity goals established through that effort as well. And so with that, we identified 10 radial routes or routes that come into Uptown, and then also 4 crosstown routes from that initial list of 22 to move that to the next stage. And so those routes include Central Avenue, Beatty's Ford, Sprinter, which runs on Wilkinson, Monroe Road, Tuckasegee, West Boulevard, just to name a few. And then the crosstown routes include Route 3 on the Plaza, Route 2 on Ashley, Route 29 that runs to UNCC, and Route 39, which runs along Eastway Drive. And so these routes were selected to advance to the next stage to get that list down to 6. And I say 6 because that was what we had just due to project limitations with the budget. But the idea or the goal for this is to help us develop a program that we can begin to roll out throughout the network. So if we find that we're experiencing delay on additional corridors, some of the treatment types that we recommend can be applied to additional corridors so that we can help improve service moving forward as well. And so from those lists, or that list of 10 and also the 4 crosstown routes, we began to look at additional goals and objectives that you all helped us identify. So we looked at how each route stacked up in terms of access to essential services. So what you see here is the color-coded map of how each route ranked in the category. And I know that this may be hard to see, but I will show you how you can access our online open house too, if you'd like to get a closer look at some of these maps and more detailed information on our analysis process. So we looked at how each route connects to education resources, fresh food opportunities, and then also healthcare. And so as you can see here, certain routes stand out. So we have Route 27 on Monroe, we have Route 9 on Central Avenue, Route 3 on the Plaza, and then Route 2 on Ashley Road. And so as we continue to look at other objectives, similarly, we rank them according to how they fare in this category. So access to affordable housing. Similarly, we have routes 9, 27, and 3 that stand out, but then also Route 7 and 16 and 2 also began to stand out in that middle level as well. In addition to that, we looked at where we're currently facing bus delay. So some of the things that I mentioned before, where we're having travel time or reliability issues. And so we found that specific routes, so for instance, West Boulevard, Route 2 on Remount Ashley, and then also the Sprinter route on Airport face additional delay. And so we looked at October 2019 metrics to help us identify delay. And so it was important to look at that for 2 reasons. One, because it was pre-COVID traffic. And so that gave us an indication of where we were facing delay in terms of if we were to actually increase the traffic levels moving forward, or similar traffic patterns moving forward. And then 2, we use October just because that's typically where we have the most service in terms of a ridership standpoint. So that helps us identify where we need to make improvements to the boarding process as well. And so moving forward from that, we also have the Charlotte 2040 equity measure that I mentioned too. So looking at how we are serving areas where we have a greater proportion of individuals that potentially face displacement. And so here we saw that Freedom Drive stood out, and then also Route 8 Tuckasegee, and then also again for Route 2 Ashley Remount, that also stood out high in this category. In addition to that, we looked at access to employment. And so here Route 16 Tryon, Route 10 West Boulevard, and Route 2 also stood out. We also had additional routes that were sort of in the middle, including Eastway on 39, and then also Route 21 on Statesville. And so with all of those categories, we were able to develop a composite score for how each route ranked in the category. And so that with that category, or with those rankings rather, we had 3 routes that stood out in terms of achieving the highest ranking in terms of how we can improve service. And so those include Route 2 on Ashley Road, Route 7 on Beatties Ford Road, and Route 9 on Central Avenue. And so we're initially focusing on these 3 routes. And as the study progresses, we'll identify 3 additional routes that we'll focus on based on the metrics. The reason why we started with these 3 routes is because these stood out in their respective categories. The additional 3 routes will take in consideration from the public on input on how we can identify those routes for improvement. And then also with these routes too, we'd like to hear from you in terms of if you think that these are the focus routes that we should be identifying, or if there's other areas that we should look at as well. And so with those, we came up with specific scenarios on how we can improve service. So first we looked at dwell delay that we face. So as I mentioned, this is the amount of time that it takes for us to pick up passengers. So the circles that you see in red, those are indications of where it takes longer for us to pick up and also drop off passengers. So as you can see on Ashley Road, which is this route here on the lower left side of the map, we face a greater boarding or greater dwell time rather on the Tryon portion and also on Remount Road. Beatties Ford Road is more centered around I-85 where we have the Rosa Parks Transit Center. And then Central Avenue is actually clustered more so around the outer portion, Albemarle Road, and then also up to the Eastland Transit Center. And so in addition to that, we also looked at travel and signal delay. And so using metrics here, we identified additional routes, additional areas and where we should focus on, and we got similar results from this standpoint too. So for instance, on Route 7, which you see here in the middle on that line, and I'll have closer shots of this as well in the next coming slides. So you can see we face delay sort of on the middle segment of the route, closer to the Rosa Parks Transit Center. And then similar on Central Avenue, more so on that outer portion. And there's also delay on the inner portion as well. And so with this, we began to develop some initial potential treatment types that we can apply to help speed up service. And so this is Route 2 Ashley Road. And so the long-term vision for this route is to have it connect from the Ashley Freedom interchange down to the Scaly Bark station. And so with this, we identified delay which we're facing on specific segments along that route. So this route primarily operates along Ashley Road, Remount Road, and then portions of South Tryon to access Scaly Bark. And so with that here, we develop a treatment toolbox that we can begin to apply to specific segments. So some of the high level recommendations for Route 2 include all-door boarding, real-time arrival information, faster fare collection, level boarding where possible, signal priority, bus bulb outs, and then queue jumps where possible. And so the way that this is working, as you can see here at the top, we have a segment from Ashley Road on Freedom and Allegheny. And so some of the recommendations here, if you follow on the chart here, we recommend that we have faster fare collection where possible. We recommend that we're implementing transit signal priority, and then also looking at potential queue jumps where possible. And I should state that these are also, at this moment at least, they are considerations for how we can improve service. So we'll be continuing to look through this list to see if there's maybe other alternatives that can help us improve service as we look at the routes long-term for these routes, and then also the 3 additional routes that we'll identify. In addition to that, we have the segment from Wilkinson Boulevard to South Tryon, where we recommend faster fare collection, level boarding where possible, and then also bus bulb outs to help improve that boarding process for individuals. We did a similar look at Beatty's Ford Road, where we identified potential treatment types. And so here we have the segment, as I mentioned, from the Rosa Parks Transit Center up to between Sunset Road. And so some potential treatment types to help us improve service include faster fare collection, of course, signal priority, and then also level boarding here. And so similar to what we saw on Ashley Road, we have different treatment types that could be potentially solutions or potential solutions rather for how we improve speed and reliability on some of these routes. In addition to that, we also looked at Central Avenue. So with this, similar recommendations. So some potential treatments that we're looking at, of course, include signal priority. So from 7th Street to the Plaza, for instance, we're looking at faster fare collection as a potential solution, and then also signal priority throughout the corridor. Eastway Drive to Sharon Amity, we face additional delay there. So some potential treatment types for improving service include faster fare collection, signal priority, and then also bus bulb outs and queue jumps where possible. And then also on Albemarle Road, the outer portion of the route between Eastland Transit Center and Albemarle's Lawyers Park and Ride, similar treatments as well, including faster fare collection, signal priority, and then also looking at the potential for queue jumps. And so these are some of the recommendations or suggestions that we have at least. So none of these are final. We're still going through the process of identifying what treatment types would help or what treatment types were appropriate for the different segments. But we wanted to present this to you, the public, to get your input to help us refine some of this and make our recommendations that we'll bring to you early next year. So as I mentioned, some of the next steps, we'll continue to develop recommendations for additional corridors. We'll begin to refine some of those recommendations on the mobility hub locations and then also the mobility plazas that I mentioned. And so with that, we'll be presenting this back to the public early next year to get your input so that we begin to make some of those refinements. So coming soon too, we'll begin to implement the signal priority throughout the network that I mentioned. So that'll help us communicate with traffic signals to improve service. I also mentioned that we just rolled out our real-time app so that individuals can track bus time arrivals in real time. So if you have access to the App Store on Google or Apple, feel free to download that app and test it out too so that you can see real-time information on when your next bus will arrive at your bus stop. And then also we'll consider new services. And so I mentioned it's important for us to look at how we can improve first mile, last mile connectivity. And so that's improving the connection to and from our transit lines, specifically our frequent transit lines. And so as we look to build some of the goals established by the Charlotte 2040 plan, such as 10-minute neighborhoods, we'll begin to look at how we can roll out mobility hubs to help support that. And then also on-demand service potentially so that we can connect individuals to and from some of those frequent corridors. So those are some of the next steps that we'll be looking at, and we'll be presenting more information to you early next year. But for this initial round, for some of the feedback on the priority treatments that we initially recommended on some of the corridors, we do encourage you to continue to be involved. So if you would like us to have a more focused presentation with your neighborhood or community group, we do invite you to contact the project team. You can go to our website at ridetransit.org/envisionmyride to get contact information, and we'll be more than happy to present to your neighborhood group so we have more of a focused discussion. You can also give feedback through our virtual open house that we have on our website. So again, if you go to ridetransit.org/envisionmyride, you can access the open house that we have, where we'll have more detailed information on some of the priority treatment types on those specific corridors, and then also some detailed information on the system-wide improvements as well. And you'll be able to zoom into those additionally so that you can get a closer look at that. You can also attend one of our drop-in meetings at the Charlotte Transit Center. So we're doing 2 drop-in meetings, one next Tuesday from 11 to 1 p.m. And then again, next Thursday evening from 4 to 6 p.m. And so this will be an open house drop-in style. So feel free to come You can speak with the project team. We'll have the open house boards that are presented in this presentation and then also in the online open house. So if you would like to meet with us in person or if you don't have access to a computer, please feel free to join us at the in-person open house as well. I do want to mention too that we are in the process of scheduling another evening virtual meeting. It will be the same content that was presented to you today, but for individuals that may not be available right now, or if they want to participate in the live Q&A, we'll be advertising that meeting date soon. So do be on the lookout for that. And then you can also email us at teltransit@charlottenc.gov if you have more specific questions, and we can follow up with you there too. And so before we get into the Q&A portion, I do want to just give you a snapshot of what you would see when you get to the open house portal. So this is room 1 that you'll have. So you'll have specific rooms that you can visit. We'll have information on what we're presenting on each board. And then you can actually click on the board to enlarge it to get more information as well. As you continue to navigate through each room, at the end of that, we'll have a chance for you to provide input on some of the suggestions for priority treatments, on the focus corridors, and then also if you would like to provide input on additional corridors that we should be focusing on as well, we'll have the opportunity for you to provide input there too. So with that, I do want to open it up now for any Q&A, and I'll turn it back over to Julianne, if you're with us.
Hi there. Great presentation, Bruce. Yes, of course, this is the Q&A portion of today's virtual meeting. So we'll start by answering a couple questions that we have received during this study and during this presentation. The first question that we want to address is, Bruce, can you discuss what is the plan for the rest of the routes? If you could just touch base on that. I know you mentioned it in your presentation, but if you could touch base on that just once more. We focused on the 3 focus corridors, 3 focus routes today, but what are the next steps?
Yeah, and so we'll continue to identify how we can make improvements throughout the network. And so I mentioned that we'll be rolling out stop level improvements, not only on the focus corridors, but also throughout the high frequency network, and then also along our crosstown routes as well. So improving bus stop amenities where possible, and then making sure that we improve connectivity to some of those hub to hub connections outside of Uptown that I mentioned too. And then also the advantage that we have is that we'll be able to activate signal priority throughout the entire network that's managed by CDOT. So that's specifically within the city of Charlotte limits. We'll still be coordinating with the towns to see what we can do there in terms of communication with the signals there. But at least the start is with the city of Charlotte with CDOT maintained intersections too. So those are some of the priority treatments that we'll begin to roll out for improvement system-wide.
And can you elaborate more on crosstown connections?
Yeah, so the crosstown connections are the routes that do not come into center Charlotte. So the CTC, for instance, our main hub in Uptown Charlotte, that's where a lot of our radial routes come for transfer connections. And so with Envision My Ride, we've been looking to build more crosstown connections where possible. And so as we begin to roll out those mobility hubs throughout the network, that'll help us improve that hub to hub connectivity outside of Uptown. So you don't necessarily have to come to Uptown to make a transfer connection just to go back out to your destination.
Thanks, Bruce. All right, our next question. What is the name of the app to get the real-time bus info? This individual cannot find it in the App Store, and I'm happy to answer that question.
I was going to defer that to you, yes.
Certainly. So the name of the app right now is CATS Pass, and in between the word CATS and Pass, there's actually a hyphen when you're looking in either the Google Play or the Apple App Store. The CATS Pass app not only provides real-time bus information, but also it's a one-stop shop where you can plan your trip and also purchase your fare. So again, that's CATS Pass, CATS-Pass in the Google Play or Apple App Store. All right, we have one more question. And again, if you have any questions, now is the time. Please type that in the chat box, sign into your YouTube or your Google account. But for right now, this will be our last question. When will the express lanes on US 74 reopen?
So that's an ongoing discussion that we're working on with NCDOT. There's a number of challenges that we face with that. One being the Hawthorne Bridge area, we would have to reconstruct that area just because of the placement of the bridge. But then also we would have to continue to coordinate with NCDOT. So I unfortunately don't have an answer as far as a timeline for you now, but we can be sure to follow up with you when we get more information on that.
All right, thanks, Bruce. And that is all for questions. So we can go ahead and wrap up our virtual meeting for today. Again, I want to reference, please visit our website, that's ridetransit.org, where you can find project information for the open house. And of course, if you have any questions, email teltransit@charlottenc.gov or call CATS customer service at 704-336-7433. That's RIDE.